What does David Foster Wallace think of postmodernism? And does he view himself as a postmodernist? And today we are going to hear Wallace talk at length about postmodernism's effect on society, on individuals, its positive qualities, and its negative qualities. And what's fun about this conversation in 2024 is that everyone has an opinion on postmodernism because a couple years ago, Jordan Peterson got on the microphone and said, the neo-Marxist postmodernists are ruining everything. And suddenly people were like, postmodernism? And Fox News and all the political pundits and everyone made it their new buzzword. But what's funny about 99% of people who have an opinion on postmodernism, and this includes people on the left and on the right, is that they have never read one chapter by a postmodernist thinker. And it's not easy, let me tell you. If you sit down and read Derrida, Foucault, Paul de Man, Deleuze, whoever, it is hard. And it's not just about your intellectual capacity, but it also includes your historical knowledge of thinkers like Nietzsche, Kant, Heidegger, Plato, and even other esoteric poets or literature writers, mostly in Europe. And so a lot of the time, from what I've seen, postmodernism has been turned into this boogeyman that people use and talk about in absolutes. And I'm sure, as you guys know, and we know on this channel, when people speak in absolutes like capitalism is evil, communism is evil, religion is evil, postmodernism is evil, it caused all these problems. Like, we know that's not a very nuanced view, and it's just an ignorant way to kind of rile up the illogical masses. But if you guys don't already know, my name is Ian, and here on Write Conscious, we talk about the greatest books and authors of all time. And Wallace is one of them. In the playlist down below, I already have over 100 videos on Wallace, and I would love to see you in more videos on Wallace or my other videos on the tapestry of other beautiful authors we cover on this channel. And so, enough from me. Let us now hear from Wallace. Quote, I guess that's supposed to be Deconstruction's original program, right? People have been under some sort of metaphysical anesthesia, so you dismantle the metaphysics axioms and prejudices, show it in cross-section, and reveal the advantages of its abandonment. It's literally aggravating. You awaken them to the fact that they've been unconsciously imbibing some narcotic pharmacon, since they were old enough to say mama. There's many different ways to think about what I'm doing. But if I follow what you mean by defamiliarization, I guess it's part of what's getting the click right is for me. It might also be part of why I end up doing anywhere from 5 to 8 total rewrites to finish something, which is why I'm never going to be a Volman or an Oates. And there were two big buzzwords in this section that I want to talk about really fast. And those are defamiliarization and metaphysical anesthesia. And Jacques Derrida, who is considered kind of the father of deconstruction, said of deconstruction that, quote, deconstruction is not synonymous with destruction. It is simply a question of being alert to the implications of our own metaphysical and rhetorical legacy. And so deconstruction's main purpose is to challenge our hidden assumptions and the binary oppositions that structure our thinking. And obviously that has been taken to the extreme in society. And at some level, in my opinion, postmodernism should be used as more of a personal way to view reality subjectively. And, applying it to the masses has been used to disastrous effect in many different ways. But postmodernism had to happen because when you go back to the post-World War II era, closed-mindedness, rigidness was still a thing. I still know so many people who are caught up in dogmatic religion, states of mind, beliefs about themselves, relationships, whatever. And just a little bit of application of deconstruction could help them see how silly what they are a part of is. We laugh at the people in history and all the dumb decisions that they made. Like, why the hell did they think that? And they just didn't have the capacity to be able to do this. And today, because every binary and every opposition and assumption has been destroyed or unveiled, it seems like nothing to us. But for Derrida and the deconstructionists, this was huge. Because you also have to think how locked down academia and thought was because of the Christian church and religion and monarchies and kind of the crazy power struggle game that we've been a part of for multiple millennia. And so if you do awaken, if you do some of this dismantling, it's not just a total form of destruction. That's not what you're doing. You are actually becoming more alert to what is actually happening in reality. a lot of the binary oppositions we've been programmed with, and I know everyone jumps to gender. Like, oh my God, they ruined gender. Okay, I get it. I know. But a lot of the other binary oppositions that we've been programmed with, good and evil, pagans versus Christians, heaven, hell, damnation, you could go on and on. Being able to break free from those is a psychologically liberating thing. And like I said, I don't know if that is applied, we're seeing how it's applied, if everyone over the course of all the binaries over the course of 40 years get destroyed, how do people react? But still, I would say most people in America and in the Western world are still totally caught within dialectical thinking because it's comfortable. If you break free and are suddenly in this postmodernist wasteland and are on your own, then it could be hard because we've seen everything in the world. But Wallace talks about defamiliarization, and Russian formalist Viktor Shklovsky, if we want to call him that. No, I'm mispronouncing his name. Shout out Victor, who's dead in the grave. But he wrote about this process of defamiliarization. But he talks about how art and writing should be presenting things anew to wake people up of this metaphysical anesthesia, to wake them up out of their slumber. And as I talked about in my video about David Foster Wallace's writing strategy, that's what he's about. He wants people, just like comedians do, to see the world in a new way. But to be able to do this is actually a very artistically nuanced thing. And that's why Wallace looks at Volman and Oates, because they have this extensive output that's, extreme. William P. Volman has like a 1.5 million word novel that he can't get published right now, even though he's one of the best living authors. And so how hard is it to do 7 or 8 real revisions of a 1.5 million word novel? Because a lot of us down here who aren't pro writers, we think of revision foundationally in terms of how we were told to revise in college. We think of the hard night revising until 11 p.m. with our essay as revision. But people like Cormac McCarthy, David Foster Wallace, they would spend 8 hours a day. And these are guys who are geniuses, people who just on a level of talent and education probably have more aptitude than you and I do. It would take them over a year to revise a draft of one of their novels of 100,000 words. I don't even know about Wallace's Infinite Jest. It took him a decade to get that done. But I've studied Cormac McCarthy, been to the archive, and it can even take over a year. And so most people who publish a novel, 8 hours a day times 300 is 2,400 hours. Most people who call themselves a novelist who release a book online or trying to get you to read their stuff haven't put it in 2,400 hours into, one of their drafts, the entire thing. And then when you add it up and you say like, wow, they did this over 6 or 7 years, they're putting 15,000 hours into one novel. Anyway, if you guys want to finish Infinite Jest and read the best novels in history with the Writeconscious book club, we are currently about to start 11 of the best novels in history. Some of these include Gravity's Rainbow, Infinite Jest, 1Q84, Europe Central, Blood Meridian, Moby Dick, and plenty of other books. I will also be posting course material for a lot of these books. I host daily office hours where you can talk to me about the books if you can't make the book club calls, which are also recorded and posted. And we have a Writeconscious writing group and a ton of other stuff. And I would love to have you over there for the book club that starts this Sunday. And you can always catch up, or if you're seeing this in the future, we'll have moved on to other books. But the Infinite Jest course is already over 6 hours long. And if you would like to join, the link is down in the description below. That's what he means there. That to actually be, when I read a William T. Volman novel, he's throwing information straight at me. Like I'm receiving it. And then I have to do the process maybe of deconstruction and defamiliarization. But Wallace's characters, and we can throw Pynchon in here, and other postmodernists, they do it for you. And it's great, honestly. Like, thank God. So moving on to our next quote, if you mean post-industrial mediated world, it's inverted one of fiction's big historical functions, that of providing data on distant cultures and persons, the first real generalization of human experience that novels tried to accomplish. If you lived in bumfuck Iowa 100 years ago and had no idea what life was like in India, good old Kipling goes over and presents it to you. And of course, the post-structural critics now have a field day on all the colonialist and phallocratic prejudices inherent in the idea that writers were presenting alien creatures instead of representing them, jabbering natives and randy concubines and white man's burden, etc. Well, but fiction's presenting function for today's reader has been reversed. Since the whole global village is now presented as familiar, electronically immediate, satellites, microwaves, intrepid anthropologists, Paul Simon Zulu backups, it's almost like we need fiction writers to restore strange things, ineluctable strangeness, to defamiliarize stuff, I guess you'd say. And so harping back on this topic again of defamiliarizing the familiar, when you look at Kipling, Orwell, these writers, Conrad, these writers of distant lands, they were obviously putting biases and their ideas on these people who didn't have the ability to speak for themselves yet because maybe they were illiterate cultures or marginalized, oppressed cultures or whatever, or just really weren't speaking English yet. But today, I mean, and this is actually surprising, like we think today, social media and connectivity. I read last year with my high school English class, Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. And almost all of them, and there aren't many black students at my school, but almost all of them had little to no knowledge about Africa. And then I was sitting there thinking, like, I teach in Southern Arizona, and I'm like, if these kids stay in Southern Arizona for their entire life, like most of them will, and go, maybe some will go to college. More people are not going to college every single year. So they're going to get a job, go into society. How much more exposure to Africa outside of maybe a quick video by Mr. Beast or a TikTok are they going to have? How much real relationship and understanding? I don't need them to know the whole history of the Biafra conflict or anything like that. But almost all of them were unfamiliar, were at times racist, use stereotypes, which is fine. They're young, they're learning. But I was just thinking, I was like, where are they going to get this information? No one's going to sit down. They're not going to be reading, Ben Okri's The Famished Road, I think it's called. That's like one of the better psychedelic, shamanic novels out there. Just shout out to, I think his name is Ben Okri. And what's funny about this is like people still still try to do the travel novel, the exploration novel. Like I know someone who's a fan of the channel, shout out to him. He travels around the world on a boat and has written multiple books about it and they've sold very well from what I've been able to see. Unless he's just faked, the hundreds of Amazon reviews he has. But what's also odd is that depression and mental health has been mapped out at this weird level. Obviously, we live in the pharmacological big pharma era, and mental health buzzwords are everywhere. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone who's been depressed, knows someone who's depressed, has ADHD, knows someone who tried to commit suicide, been to therapy, watched Brene Brown's TED Talk online. And so there's almost this arrogance when it comes to mental states and the depth of the mind, because people, I've been there. I've been to hell and back, because they felt depressed in their subjective experience. But then when you start reading people like Dostoevsky, Proust, just to name some classic authors, and just really good writers who go into, deep into characters' heads from any era, you're like, oh shit, there's levels to this game. There are levels to experiences. Not to be an elitist, not to discount anyone, but this is what Wilhelm Reich theorized in his book, The Mass Psychology of Fascism, and a lot of his other works, because he was saying that a lot of men, became fascists and were struggling and having psychological problems because they were having orgasms, that were so weak that they barely felt anything, that they were so numb inside, and their psychological terrain and all this stuff was so bizarre that they were feeling no emotions. Their orgasms felt like nothing. And so in his program of increasing the orgone and doing all this stuff, that was his theory. And Wilhelm Reich was one of Freud's proteges and main students, along with Jung, Alder, and Rank. And he went the whole sexual route. But it's just interesting to know, and it's a taboo we're not allowed to talk about, that some people literally aren't experiencing anything, are, the definition of NPC in this simulation of reality. Yes, they get sad when their dog dies and their mom dies. Oh my God, my arm hurts. Okay. People since day one, the caveman felt that. Oh, wife is now dead. Oh no, so sad. Okay. Yes, that's human experience. Yeah, we can do that. There's more. And so it feels like we can't present strangeness because everyone saw Midsummer and everyone has a tattoo. Everybody listens to metal music now and is super edgy. But as Rilke said, one of the greatest poets of all time, that if you were able to see angels for what they were, you would die. You know, every angel is terrifying. And the scariest thing of life is when you start peeling back layers of reality. This is why people have bad trips on psychedelics, because they start seeing truths and start seeing reality for what it is and taking off the blinders. You could have the most boring story, boring everything. And if you could do that, you're heading toward a masterpiece. And that's what postmodernism gave literature. Because when you go read Hemingway, oh, it's the iceberg theory. When you read Jane Austen, like, ugh, it's like, okay, I'm doing it. Everything's overt. But there's so much, especially with the complexity of our reality, that is existing in the unconscious. And with our leisure time and our extended lifespan and all the access to information, we do have the ability to defamiliarize our own reality. And when you do, it's, like I said, the biggest head trip you'll ever go on, because psychedelics do it for you in the trip. You're on the trip and oh my God. But this is why, in the East, meditation is so important, and why drugs eventually just stop working, is that if you can do that permanently, that's the real fix. And in this next quote, Wallace is talking about David Lynch and the American author Mark Lehner. He has a great book called E2 Babe. And if you guys want access to my free document that details David Foster Wallace's over 400 of his favorite books, which include Mark Lehner's books, the link is down in the description below. I would love for you guys to expand your reading list. And that list also includes the 3 books that Wallace always wrote with by his side. And so back to the quote. And Lehner's real good at it. For our generation, the entire world seems to present itself as familiar. But since that's, of course, an illusion in terms of anything really important about people, maybe in any realistic fiction's job is opposite of what it used to be. No longer making the strange familiar, but making the familiar strange again. It seems important to find ways of reminding ourselves that most familiarity is mediated and delusive. And the perfect example of this is David Lynch. And I'm not going to spoil anything from Lynch's films, but in his film Blue Velvet, it takes place in small town America. And it starts and there's like an ear on the ground. And suddenly you're in this kind of dreamland and all these things are happening that are bizarre. And it's just all kind of bubble. It's all just kind of underneath the surface. And that's how most towns in America are. He makes us re-look again at suburban America. And my favorite Lynch film is a straight story about a man who lives in the Midwest. He's retired. He has a bad hip. And there isn't a crazy plot. There's no sex. There's no real action. But he makes us look again at Midwest America, which we all think we know. That's familiar to us. It's just plains and country people and nothing here to see. And he redefines it. And so much so that I'm going to have all my English classes this year watch it, because a lot of us have become cemented in how we feel about America, especially the Midwest. And there is nothing better than that, I think, to break us free. And so there's nothing too new or crazy in that last section. So let us move on. Quote, one new context is to take something almost narcotically banal. It's hard to think of anything more banal than a game show. In fact, the banality's one of the great hooks, as the essay discusses. And to try to reconfigure it in a way that reveals what a tense, strange, convoluted set of human interactions the final banal product is. The scrambled, flash-cut form I ended up using for the novella was probably unsubtle and clumsy, but the form clicked for me in a way it just hadn't when I had done it straight. And Wallace uses the game show multiple times throughout his career. In his short story, which is probably my favorite by him, and I think one of the better ever written, for sure in the top 25, and it's titled Little Expressionless Animals, and that is about the TV show Jeopardy, which for people, who are a little bit older than me, was just on TV all the time. It is the most boring and repetitive thing of all time. And Wallace, with Little Expressionless Animals, turns it into this weird nightmare mixed with a love story and commentary on mental health and entertainment. It's a really weird story. And this is an easy example of what we can do with postmodernism. Little Expressionless Animals takes a game show, shows us how silly it is, shows us the behind the scenes stuff and how the hosts are perverts and how the whole industry is locked down. And he refreshes our view on it. And this ties into David Foster Wallace's writing strategy and what I've been telling you guys. You guys are in a bubble, hopefully. You understand something really well. And there really aren't that many writers out there who are doing this. And so you really can defamiliarize something out in the world. in your short stories, in a novel. And like, that should be an emphasis. I talk all the time, sentence structure, contrast, and all this other, stuff. But how often have I personally said you need to defamiliarize something, like, because we like that. We want to see something fresh. I think I'm going to add that to my toolbox. I think it's not a bad thing to think about or a bad thing to add, because Wallace, from what he's talking about, specifically adds this. He says that's why it takes him so long, because that's what he's attempting to do. It's a conscious effort. And going back to my earlier point, once again, everyone thinks that, if you're going to write a poem, I love Basho, some of the beat poets who just write a first draft and send it off. Inspired poetry. But inspired novels, don't make anyone read that. Don't make us waste our time with anything longer than 8 lines if it's going to be inspired. You're going to need to revise it. You're going to make it, it needs to be at least palatable so people don't feel like they're getting scammed. Because every single day I get at least 3 to 5 novels in my inbox. And within the first page or two, I already see sentence structure errors, grammatical errors, and that's fine. But if you're sending it to me, you're saying this is my final product, no one else wants this. And I want to I want to write back like, hey, this needs about 7,000 more hours of revision, but I see some hope in here. And so you don't have to be David Foster Wallace, everybody. You can write an essay and defamiliarize. You can write poetry and defamiliarize. You can write in relaxed ways and really transform people's lives and not have to spend 10,000 hours on something. I just want to let you guys know that, because a novel is you asking someone to spend 6 hours of their time on you when they have every other book that's ever been written also to read from. Have you ever seen an indie film? How did you feel about it? Like, sometimes they're good, but maybe even a super indie film, not just like an independent film, but like low budget, some guy just gets his camera and some friends together and films something. When you sit and watch it, you're like, I could be watching something with everything better on the screen. And so that's how you need to feel about your writing. You need to realize that people have choices, that readers aren't dead. They're, left-wing politics or right religious people and people becoming dumb haven't ruined reading. It's that in the literary fiction genre, there is actually a standard that you have to meet first. And then you could talk about all the corruption and all the other stuff. And in our own life, this is actually a great way to gain momentum. Sometimes when I'm looking at the amount of work I have to do, I have 200 essays from a bunch of 9th graders who have bad handwriting I have to grade. I have to do a bunch of work on my own writing and all these things that kind of feel boring and repetitive. I'm sure you've done this before. If you gain a new perspective on it, if you take this a subjective lens and break free, suddenly it feels fun and you can enjoy doing it. That's what postmodernism is about at its core, not whatever else you've been told. Where it's been taken is a product of other people's visions and corruption of it. Just like, Christianity, capitalism, terrible things have been done in the name of those. Is the core vision about that though? No. And so what are your thoughts on David Foster Wallace being a postmodernist? What do you think of postmodernism in general? And thank you guys for being here, and I will see you guys in the next video.